Welcome back, everybody, to Rasputin Gaming Presents. With the release of Avowed, I thought I would bring you my review of Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire after obtaining the Platinum Trophy. Before we get into all of that, let me get my preamble out of the way. I review games after obtaining the Platinum Trophy to set me apart from the other reviewers on the platform. I'm happy to connect with you via PSN. Just look up Rasputin, RAZZPUY, yes, a YTIN. With that out of the way, let's actually dive into this thing. Now, if you're unaware, Pillars of Eternity 2 is an isometric classic role-playing style game that is, of course, the sequel to the original Pillars of Eternity. The reason I'm bringing this to you now with the release of Avowed is because these are brought to you, all of these games were brought to us by Obsidian. So let's talk about the world of Aora, which is actually the world of Pillars of Eternity and where the newly released Avowed will be set. When it comes to the world in Pillars of Eternity 2, this is a direct sequel to the Pillars of Eternity 1, and because of that, there were a lot of choices that you could make that would affect the world of Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. At the beginning of the game, you can choose either a predetermined set of choices for how you completed the first game, or you can import a save from the original Pillars of Eternity that will then use your decisions from that game to affect the world now of PoE 2, which I thought was really cool how they carried that through and let your choices in the first game affect the second game. Because of that, depending on those decisions or the predetermined world state that you picked from the list, some NPC characters might be dead, some of them might be alive, all of them could be dead. So it does affect a lot of things like that, which right off the bat adds a lot of replay value in my opinion. Talking about how the world is built before we get into exploring it. Pillars of Eternity 2 has some truly interesting lore, and I don't want to go into it in too much depth or we would be here all day. I will say that the game definitely expands the lore in a lot of ways through the main story and through its DLCs and through just exploring the world of Deadfire Archipelago. Let's talk about some more specific things about the world. First, this game has a very creative and extensive world map, unlike any other CRPG. Across the board, I really like this world map a bunch because you actually get to explore it. If you're unaware, Pillars of Eternity 2 is set in the Deadfire Archipelago, hence the name Deadfire. And you get to quickly captain a ship and sail around the archipelago, but it's not just like predetermined lines or on rails like a typical RPG style game. You're pretty free to roam wherever you want on the map. On the map, though, you can only go from city to city or specific points of interest on the map or on each of the islands that you discover. While you actually get to travel the world, the map opens up and pushes back the fog of war as you explore. You're going to find all sorts of stuff. You can find lost islands, and once you explore and clear the dungeon on them, you can then name them, which is pretty cool. I found this to be a fun little thing that you can do, and it definitely increased the engagement for me. There is also a trophy tied to naming your first Uncharted island and one for naming all of the Uncharted islands. So that's something you're going to be doing in search of that Platinum Trophy. There's a cool dynamic weather system that includes a day-night cycle. Also, because you're sailing at sea, there's a real chance you could run into storms. If you're not able to avoid the storm, it will lead you into a text event, kind of like a book-like story event. I thought the storm idea itself was pretty interesting and keeps you on your toes. I think exploring the world in this game is really polished, honestly. Some of the best that CRPGs have to offer, in my opinion. And the last thing I'll mention on that front is that nothing will lead you to some of the best content in the game. You just have to go and find it. You will need to just jump on your ship and go sailing out and about and find islands that nothing sends you to. You'll explore them and you'll find some really cool things. There might even be a quest if you go there, but nothing's going to send you there, and I thought that was awesome. A true commitment to an open world. As I mentioned, you will get to captain a ship. Although you start off with a very specific ship, there are several ships that you can actually buy in the main city of Neketaka. There's a ship right there that you can buy several different types of ship from and then outfit them and upgrade them. Again, there's a trophy tied to purchasing one ship of every type that is available in the game. There is a morale system at play, although it is unlike Classified France 44's morale system. If you have high morale for your crew, which takes feeding them and supplying them with drinks, your crew will perform better. They will be better at ship speed, maneuvering, and combat. The morale will degrade over time, so while you're out sailing about, you need to make sure that the morale is kept up well. One last note on the crew: they'll sing sea shanties as you're about to sail around the world. Tweets from Josh Sawyer, who was heavily involved in the entire Pillars of Eternity franchise, said that the sea shanties being sung will depend on the makeup of your crew. So, if you have an all-male crew, the sea shanties you hear while you are sailing will be in an all-male voice, whereas if it's all-female crew, then you'll have female voices, and if it's a mixed crew, you'll actually hear male and female voices, which I think wound up being just a really, really cool touch. I do want to mention something though. The main story is very short. It's not very long at all, and that is because most of the story is actually kind of tied up in a lot of the side quests and in the factions and stuff then that relates back to the main story. However, none of it is directly tied to the main story, and most things aren't keeping you from just doing the main story. So because of that, the story kind of winds up being just as long as you want it to be. I want to mention also that there are a number of difficulty levels in this game, although there is not a trophy tied to beating the game on any specific difficulty. On a side note, there is a set of challenges you can access from the main menu called Magrin's Fires that are like unique challenges that you can turn off or on that are basically game rules that will vastly increase the difficulty outside of the normal settings. I'm not really going to cover them here in any great depth. I just wanted to mention that they exist since there is a unique challenge put out by the developers called the Ultimate. The Ultimate requires you to complete the game with all of those turned on and a number of other specific requirements. If you can complete the Ultimate, then Obsidian will send you a congratulations letter and put you on their honor roll. Okay, with those things out of the way, let's talk about character creation. So in my opinion, character creation is much improved over the original Pillars of Eternity. First, you can still multi-class. However, you do have to choose that at character creation, so it's not like other CRPGs. In most CRPGs, as you level up, you get to choose to take points in other classes if you want, but that's not how it works in PoE 2. If you're going to multi-class, you have to pick it at character creation, and similarly, when you're hiring your mercenaries, at the moment you recruit them is when you have to pick if they're going to multi-class or not. With that said, there are progression trees that are visible now, unlike the first Pillars of Eternity. This was my biggest gripe about the original Pillars of Eternity, is that it required a ton of knowledge from just playing the game and leveling up each class because there were no trees you could look at to see what abilities and skill levels you were getting at each level. It just wouldn't tell you. However, thankfully, Pillars of Eternity 2 addressed that. There are clear progression trees that you can see at character creation. At that time, you'll be able to see what abilities you can acquire at each level, which in my opinion makes it vastly better right there in terms of character creation. Now that said, other things to know about character creation is that Pillars of Eternity uses its own system. So if you're familiar with other CRPGs, it should feel familiar enough, but it is a unique system. The more you play it, the better you'll be at it. With that out of the way, let's talk about combat. First, I'm going to go over ship combat. So because you are sailing and you are doing the whole pirate theme thing, you're going to run into other ships and you're going to have ship-to-ship combat. To put this right out there, ship-to-ship combat is frankly not very good. This is not like Assassin's Creed Black Flag. In my humble opinion, you're better off just avoiding ship-to-ship combat and just immediately going for boarding enemy ships. Because boarding ships is going to bring you into actual combat, which will be over much quicker and is much less of a headache than the ship-to-ship combat. It's exactly the same as doing any other combat in the game, so that's why I recommend jumping straight into boarding as a way to manage your combat at sea. Now for regular combat, it comes in real time with pause mode or a turn-based mode. Turn-based, which was added much later through a number of patches. So both variations on the combat are pretty solid. Honestly, I've tried both. With that being said, I think in this particular game, real time with pause is the way to go. In almost all cases, other than PoE 2, I prefer turn-based. That's just the kind of player I am. I like to be a lot more tactical with my combat when I can. But Pillars of Eternity 2 has a really good real-time with pause system. However, like anything, there are pros and cons to each combat system. Additionally, there is also an AI editor now. Your AI editor is not save game specific. Once you've saved an AI layout in any game you start, is going to have that AI layout for each character and NPC. To be frank, I didn't use the AI editor at all. I have heard and read that it does help manage your party of 6 because micromanaging real time with pause can be a little bit difficult. However, I would say this almost goes a step too far because it's to the point where if you know what you're doing, you can set up this AI to do everything for you. You'll eventually wind up engaging in very little combat that way. So as funny as it sounds, it's almost too good as what it does. So therefore, I didn't use it. With that out of the way, let's mention companions. Now, as I mentioned way back in the beginning of this video, depending on which world state you choose or is determined by the PoE 1 save that you imported, some of these NPCs could be dead. Many of the actual companions are actually returning characters from the first game, such as Edar and Aloth, which I thought was really nice because, again, it's a direct sequel, and depending on the world state, your interaction with those characters could be entirely different, or they might just straight up not be in the game because they're dead based on your actions in the first game, which, again, I think adds lots of replay value because you can set up different world states. I'm not going to go over every single companion in depth, but I will say that most of them are intended to represent a specific faction in the game, and this becomes a whole thing throughout the game because what you're doing and what the factions of the game are doing creates a direct tie to your team. Again, I don't want to spoil anything major, but essentially some of your companions are kind of like spies. The game even points it out. It's not like hiding things, so this isn't really a spoiler, but some of these people are literally just with you so they can report back to their appropriate faction. The game tells you that, and while you can certainly earn their loyalty, and some of them can even be romanced, I just thought that that particular interaction with me personally was kind of interesting. So let me end up by just saying that I did like pretty much all of the companions. I thought Obsidian did a good job giving all of them really cool stories. The game goes out of the way to make unique things about them. So more often than not, some of them have unique things that your character themselves cannot have through character creation. For example, Taka, who is a godlike Amawa of the Huana faction, is a druid, and he gets a unique shape shift of a hammerhead shark, which I thought was really cool because the rest of your characters can't do that. He's the only one. And by the way, hammerhead sharks are one of my personal favorite sea creatures. So for me, that was a really nice thing that they did there. I kind of connected a little more with the game because of that. And then you have Pelagina, who is a godlike, but for her story reasons has actually become less godlike than most of the other godlike. So previously I mentioned the factions a few times, so let's talk about them a little and how they interact with each other. So you're in the Deadfire archipelago, which is the ancestral home of the Wana. They are tribal folk that have lived in the archipelago basically for all of time, or as at least as far as anyone can remember. They're very much a tribal people in a lot of ways. They have a caste system. The most important thing about them is control over their archipelago. You might be wondering, how are tribal people keeping up with the rest of the Pillars of Eternity world, especially if you've played the first one. These tribals are keeping up because they are practicing what they call water shaping, which is something your companion Tekahu will do. And actually, water shaping is no joke. So despite being tribals and inherently coming off as a little primitive, these people can literally have the ocean swallow ships. They are a force to be reckoned with in their archipelago. Now on land, it's a different story, But again, they want to control the archipelago, and that archipelago is rich in resources, specifically Audra. If you're unfamiliar with the series, Audra is engaged in the cycle of souls. The archipelago is rich in Audra, and other factions want it, and that's the diplomatic situation of the archipelago. Because they want to control it, outsiders are coming in to get this Audra and set up shop in their homelands. The Wana are playing this game of needing to trade with people, but also not wanting to cede control of their lands. So there's kind of some back and forth here that's part of the political drama in the game. So who are these factions coming into the archipelago? First we have the Valiant Trading Company. This is the faction that Pallegina is associated with. These are merchants from Old Vela. These people are just old money, and they're all about making coin. So they want to come into the archipelago and set up shop operations on Audra sites. They want to mine the Audra because it's incredibly valuable. And now they're coming into these homelands, making deals and contracts with the tribal villages, exploiting them and mining the Audra. Then we have the Rawatai. The Rawatai are military focused. They're a collection of a lot of different races really, but primarily Amawa. In order to gather the things that they need, they have to band together to survive. And they're coming to the archipelago to primarily invest in an area called the Andros Mortar, because it has storms that are very similar to the ones that just hover over the Rawatai's homeland all the time. So they're looking for a way to deal with that while also trying to set up shop and take control of the Deadfire archipelago. Then we have the Principe. These guys are just straight up pirates. Because you're in an archipelago around a bunch of islands, there are ships everywhere, and that means there's going to be some pirating going on. And the Principe are the pirates. What I've told you is just the overall situation in the Deadfire. Things are tense even outside of the main story, which has much bigger implications than this. So with all that set up, I do really like the setting. I thought the pirate theme was a bunch of fun. The rest of the political intrigue goes back and forth, and you get to determine which way you want to go. There are several paths throughout the game that involve dealing with these factions. And as you work your way to the Platinum Trophy, you will come to conclusions with each faction in turn. Okay, so let's jump into the trophy section of this review. As noted before, you can play Pillars of Eternity 2 on any difficulty that suits you, since there is no trophy associated with the difficulty level. There are a bunch of story-related trophies which will come naturally. Then there are several trophies attached to completing side quests, which you should do anyways if you're enjoying the game. And lastly, there are the usual crafting trophies and the RPG game style trophies that you should expect from this type of classic role-playing game. There are not any trophies that require you to save scum either, which is nice, as those can get tedious in their own right. I was able to obtain the Platinum Trophy in a single playthrough, which took me just about 71 hours with a couple of false starts included in there. If you find yourself struggling to figure out how to get a particular trophy, feel free to reach out and I will help you out and let you know how I accomplished that. I found Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire to be an extremely satisfying Platinum Trophy to earn. As usual, let me wrap up some things in the pros and cons section of this review. For pros, I really like the main story and the side content, including the DLCs. I thought the story keeps you engaged and to some degree immersed. On an aside, I'm not a big immersion person. I don't get caught up in all that stuff. I either enjoy the game or not. But for those of you that are into immersion, this game does it very well. I enjoyed the combat and all its different flavors. As I mentioned before, I'm mostly a turn-based person, but PoE 2 does a very good job with real-time with pause combat. All of the characters and NPCs were interesting, and I enjoyed that there were returning companions from the first game. The biggest pro for me was the world. Obsidian did a marvelous job with the setting, the world, and the environment. This is where the game really shines. As for the cons, there were things that carried over from the first game that I didn't like at all. Unlike all standard CRPGs, the inventory system is god-awful. It's really bad. It's not unusable, but it's bad. The second thing is Pillars of Eternity used its own character progression system, and because of that, There's nowhere to look to learn about the system ahead of time, about the skills and abilities. You just kind of got to learn on the fly, which kind of sucks. Character creation could do a better job of explaining things. Again, that can be a very common CRPG problem. If you are speedrunning the main story, the game will be very, very short for you, and you will potentially be very disconnected from all the rest of that the game has to offer. This isn't unheard of, by the way, and it actually was Obsidian's response to the criticisms about how long the first Pillars of Eternity was. So, in summary, I very much enjoyed the game. It's a drastic improvement over Pillars of Eternity 1 in almost every facet. Although I do not have strong feelings about the theme, I did like the pirate motif. If that isn't your cup of tea, don't worry, because if you pay attention to the story and the fantasy premise, the pirate setting won't be much of an issue. If you're doing all of the side content, and there's plenty of it, the game really does a good job of building a world that you can enjoy. I would definitely recommend Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. It's a good way to get primed for a vow when it eventually comes to PlayStation 5. It absolutely is such a great game. In my opinion, PoE 2 honestly improves on the original Pillars of Eternity in basically every way. Most of my complaints with PoE 2 are minor annoyances. It's a fantastic game that adds a ton to the lore of Aora, the universe and setting. I thought the stories were really good. I loved almost all of the characters, even the NPCs. Personally, hands down one of my favorite CRPGs. And since you can get the Platinum Trophy with a minimum of friction, this game is highly recommended. As with any game, it's not perfect and there's room for improvement, but it comes quite close. Avowed, the next game in the universe, is a first-person RPG kind of thing, which takes a step away from the isometric flavor of the first two games. It is fairly common belief that Obsidian went this route because Pillars of Eternity 2 did not sell very well. It wasn't a flop. It did make money, but it's my understanding it actually sold much less than the original Pillars of Eternity, which is a real shame because, again, this is a great game and honestly is better than the first one. It's my belief that the things that dragged down the first game led people not to play PoE 2. I do believe that, and if you're a fan of CRPGs, you should play this one. With that out of the way, guys, truly thank you so much for watching. I could not do this without you guys. Despite the channel not getting a ton of love, I cannot express enough how thankful I am for those of you that have subscribed. To those of you that drop likes on my videos, that is very much appreciated too. For those of you leaving comments, I enjoy your thoughts and questions, and I'm always happy to interact with you. I hope you find this review informative. If you did, let me know how you feel about this game down in the comment section below, which of course means to like, comment, and subscribe. All three of those YouTube beats. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. I really do appreciate it. Be safe out there and have a fantastic day.